Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Yu, and it is my great pleasure to facilitate today's webinar on strategies and practical insights for developing a competitive NHMRC Investigator grant application. Thank you all for taking time to attend this session. We're especially grateful to our invited speakers for generously sharing their experience, their expertise, and practical advice relating to NHMRC Investigator Grant Scheme. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owner of the lands on which we meet today. I'm joining you from Perth, from the Wajak Noongar country here in Perth, Western Australia, and I pay respects to elders past, present, and future. I also extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today from across Australia. I also acknowledge and celebrate the importance of inclusive knowledge sharing and the valuable contribution of women and diverse researchers in advancing health and medical research. Creating space for diverse voices and perspectives strengthen the quality, relevance, and impact of our collective work. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. We have three speakers. Firstly, Dr. Sahar Kasvari, an emerging leader and a recipient of an HMRC Investigator Grant EL1 at Marta Research Institute. She has also been awarded with major competitive funding, including from Australian Liver Foundation Fellowship. Next, we will hear from Professor Sumaira Haisnain. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. An NHMRC Investigator Grant L1 recipient who leads the immunopathology group at Marta Research. Sumaira has an outstanding track record in securing competitive research funding with over 10 million in grant support of her program so far. And finally, we're very pleased to welcome Professor Helena Teed, the director of the Monash Center for Health Research Implementation and an endocrinologist at Monash Health. Professor Teed is an L3 recipient and had a distinguished academic career supported by NHMRC fellowship funding and a sustained record of leadership in health and medical research. We are very grateful for each of our speakers for sharing their time and expertise with us today. So how this works, each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes to talk, followed by time for questions and discussion at the end of the session. For all the audience, you are welcome to submit any question throughout the webinar via the question and answer function, and we will address as many as possible during the discussion at the end of the webinar. It is now with my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sahar Kasvari. Sahar, thank you again for joining us today, and I'll hand this over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yu. Hi, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this webinar. Definitely, these workshops helped me a lot during preparing my own investigator grant, and I hope it can help you too. Okay. So, a bit of background about me. I finished my PhD at the end of September in 2016, and my PhD was about the metabolism and obesity and diabetes, and I actually had thesis for publication. And then after that, in 2016, I started my first postdoctoral work. And I worked on the role of IL-22 in metabolism. And in 2019, I started my second postdoctoral work focusing on the role of macrophages in metabolism and liver diseases. So as you can see, I kind of like transitioned from metabolism to immunometabolism slowly. And during these years from my PhD, I applied for so many different grants and fellowship, and yes, so some of them were successful. I was CIB on an NHMRC IDEA grant in 2022, and also I got the Liver Foundation Fellowship in 22 to 24 for 3 years. And from 2025, I started my NHMRC Investigator Grant EL1. So the first thing, top 10 publication. So this is the biggest part of the application, obviously, and it's 35% of the score. As year one, I understand that it's quite challenging to pick your top 10. You might not have many options. So, but the reviewers don't need to know this. Remember that the way that you write about it can show that you had many, many different options, and these are your best top 10. This is a very dry section for the reviewers to go through, but you can make it a bit easier to review. For example, you can stick to one structure, like putting the metrics, then outcome, impact, and contribution for each one of them. And the way that you put them together, I understand that they say it should be in chronological order, but it doesn't mean that you need to stick to it like one by one. Make sure you choose them based on their impact. For example, for year one, go with the best one, the most recent one, first author for yourself, the one that has the biggest impact. As for metrics, I would recommend you use something like Cyber rather than Google Scholar. I know that Google Scholar give you better numbers, but remember that the reviewers also know this. So when you're using something like Cyber, you can actually show off your better metrics. And use citation metrics that are more common and are known by the reviewers, like field rate citation. And especially for year one, it happens that sometimes you put a publication that is not in Q1. In these kind of situations, make sure you highlight why this journal is important in your field. Okay, so it's okay if it's like Q2, but make sure you highlight the importance. And the second section is about the outcome, impact, and contribution. I personally prefer this part to be separately, but obviously you have a limited number of characters, so it's up to you, but make sure that this part really highlights the overall outcome and impact of the journal, but mainly your role. So be bold and punchy about your role. For example, like I led this project or I designed this project. Okay. And when you're using, for example, when you are putting a publication that you're a middle author, you cannot really say, I led this project, but again, you can highlight your role in another way. For example, if you have very specific skill that helped you be involved in that work, then you can highlight that. And also use words that are very flashy, like paradigm shifting, novel, policy changing, to increase the importance of your work again. The second part, the research impact. To be honest, writing a good research impact is still a mystery to myself. When I was writing mine, I had so many questions. I didn't know where to start, especially when I applied. You had 3 sections that they were exactly the same. It was just a few wording that were different. So is it about the research program or is it about you? So how much do you need to stick to the instructions from the university? So when I wrote mine, I basically focused on the research program a bit more than myself. Then I got the feedback that this is a fellowship that's about you, not about the research program. But as a EL1, when you're just working on a project for 1 or 2 years, it's very hard to say how much you've done. But again, you can make this about yourself. So basically, there's no right or wrong about this section. You just need to highlight what you have brought so far and what you're gonna do in the future. You probably receive feedback that is not a part that you put your track record, but you can again show off your skills. For example, if the research program has led to a certain place, what are you gonna do to improve it, to change the direction, to make it about you? And also like highlight the reach and significance. Any publication that you had in that research program, how your role in that research program changed the way that the publication became better. Use the metrics as much as you can in this section. For example, Web of Science can give you good metrics about every single publication that you're putting in there. Or if you, for example, have a contribution to something that a database that is public now. All of these can be very useful to increase the significance of your work. Also make this like a narrative so the reviewer doesn't get confused about your contribution. Especially for EL1, it's really hard to link your work with the previous work. There are some big work that has been done before you, but you can still link your current publication to those old ones. And then the leadership. So I think it's a very good part that you can get 15% work. For this part, I would recommend that you start with a very bold sentence. I know it can feel weird or cheesy, but believe me, reviewers actually expect you to start with something like that. This is the part that you can really sell yourself. And then you can actually, in that section, put what you're going to talk about later. For example, your research mentoring, your research policy, your professional contributions. And remember that in this section, your contribution to the committees, conferences, and peer review work is as important to your contribution to supervision work. And these are the two comments that I got from my reviewers, and they both actually highlighted my mentoring community engagement in this section. And anything that you put in this section, make sure that you put the evidence. Because if you don't, then it can really feel like unreal. And these are not the parts that the reviewer can go and check. For example, your publication, they can go and check. But if you're putting like committee work, just say what you brought to that committee. So then in that case, you can highlight your work and also bringing the evidence to prove that you actually did do all these amazing jobs. And the research proposal. So this is the part that can actually help you a lot with your score. And this is the part that can set you apart from your peers. Remember that this is not a small grant. This is actually a fellowship that is supposed to set a base for your future independent career in research. So what you're writing here is showing your future niche. So make sure that you highlight your vision for the next 5 years, and after that, what big problems are you going to address? And that first page, many people are going to tell you, but it's not enough. You wouldn't understand the importance of the first page until you start to review grants. When the reviewers are tired of going over and over a different application, and then your first page can excite them to read the rest of your proposal or decide that this is average work. And remember that your reviewers are also scientists, so they can really get excited about your work. So make sure you define this big, important problem. What is your vision? What are you bringing? What have you done before? And the overarching aim that you are planning to achieve during these 5 years. Okay, so remember, don't need to write about the number of mice that you're using. Don't go into details. You need to make it like a big project. And for year one, it is, again, very hard. Like when I wrote my proposal, the first feedback that I got was that, please rewrite this. This is not a small 1-year grant. So make it big and very compelling. The other thing in this section is that you can highlight the feasibility and highlight the help that you are going to receive from your mentors. Because especially for EL1, the reviewers expect people to help you. So you can highlight the people, the mentors that are going to help you during these 5 years to grow, to become independent in your work. So some tips that I can give you at the end of my talk. is that make sure you read NHMRC guidelines thoroughly. There are so many different points that can help you a lot. Definitely start early. Writing investigator grant is not a 1 or 2 week job for year one. It's easier to go through a small sections slowly rather than rushing through like each section and write something. Ask as many people as you can to review your application. I understand it's not easy. You may not find many people who willingly review all your application. Obviously, your supervisor and your peers can help you with your proposal a lot, but just ask people to go through your, for example, like the research impact. It is not very long, but they can actually help you if you can address all the things that you want. Just ask them, what is your feedback? Was it easy to read? Could you see what I was trying to highlight? Yes, there are not many people that are willing to check the whole. It's a big application, but you can ask people for a small favors. And definitely attend workshops. They help a lot. I learned a lot going through different workshops to write different part of it. Even the small pieces like lay description can actually, like, different workshops can help you a lot. I'm pretty sure that all libraries can give you access to previous successful applications. Learning the language of writing a grant was a big thing for me because you don't understand how amazing you're doing until you compare your work with others. And then you start learning that I can, for this instance, say that I did this. And that can be big. And yes, definitely use other resources from your university, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Sahar, for that very insightful talk. We'll leave questions to the end of the session. I will now love to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Sumaira Hasnain. Sumaira, over to you. Thank you.
Hopefully you can see my slides now.
Yes, we can see your slides perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I also have some tips and tricks for the investigator grant, but more so aimed at the L1 level. So excuse me for the EL levels because I had not been successful in those levels before. So I guess I'd just like to start by saying this is a disclaimer for the presentation. Really, this is what I find useful and what has worked for me. So just take that as, there's not really a magic formula really to write investigator grants. A little bit about me. I did my PhD in the UK and then moved to Australia for my postdoc, and I have been here ever since, mainly because of the weather. And it's been a really nice difference to the UK. So really, I wanted to highlight first thing that the reviewers really see after your synopsis and your abstract is your career stage and career context. So make sure that you look at the guidelines around the career context as well, and what you're applying for and why you're applying for that particular level. Because it's really important to highlight to the reviewers why you're exactly applying for that level, especially if there's questions raised about years post PhD, etc. So just look at that leadership level, and really, I've put mine here, and I've just highlighting that, just make it really easy for the reviewers. So this is what you see in the guidelines, and really it gives you exactly what the reviewers want to see, and reviewers are going to score you on as well. So just make sure that you make it really easy for them to find. I've just done it as bullet points, reflecting what's in the guidelines, so that the reviewers can just follow exactly why I have applied at L1 level. So now coming to the track record versus the knowledge gain, and really just to highlight again, as Sahar said, this is the biggest part really, and 70% is your track record and all about you. So make sure that you spend a lot of time on this, because I know that this is all this dry stuff that we don't like to do. We really like to concentrate on the research proposal. And really, you should be spending 70% of your time on this section, the track record section, as opposed to the grant proposal. So just make sure that that you're putting in enough time for that. And really, my favorite thing to do when I'm writing the grants is to look at the category descriptors and the score descriptors that are in the guidelines. And the reason for that is that all the information as a reviewer that I have to score on is present in those guidelines. So really, I have the category descriptors in front of me when I am scoring a grant. So the easier you make it for the reviewers to find the information that they need to score you on, the better it is. So the category descriptors really, really count for a lot. So have a look at each one of them. So the publication ones, for instance, they have keywords: paradigm shifting, transformative, why it's central. So have a use of those words. And I really think formatting matters. So the easier you make it for the reviewers to pick on the information, the easier. I do go with the chronological order, but as Sahar also mentioned, definitely prioritize those that you have contributed to heavily. So if your first or last author publications, highlight those and highlight relative to opportunity as well. Again, consistent information, consistent formatting. So I'll just give you an example of what I think the formatting makes it easier for the reviewers with my reviewer hat on. This is just an example of one of my publications, but just to say that, like if you have the authors, put yourself in caps and don't forget that, because the Sapphire system doesn't allow for bold or anything like that. So put yourself in caps. Leave spaces, because you do have the luxury, at least in the publication section, for leaving spaces. Have the title, journal, date, and volume. And then, if you do that for all the publications and the formatting is the same, it's so much easier for the reviewers to read. And again, I follow a same formula for the explanation section as well, which is in line with the category descriptors. So what is your role in the publication? So whether you're, if I just go back, here I've said sole, senior, and corresponding author. So you could say something like this: your first author led the work or led the technical work. And then what did your work demonstrate? Why it's important? So tell the reviewers that. The impact of the work in the field, so larger, bigger picture sort of, and what it means to your specific field. And then the journal standing in the field. And as Sahar pointed out as well, if it's not a Q1 journal, put in, where it is in a specific field. So for instance, in my one, I've put Q1 journal, but you can also get measures like this is 7th out of 177 in the immunology field. So something like this will really help reviewers understand the impact of your work. So the next section is the research impact section. And as Sahar said, it's 10% for the reach and significance and the applicant's contribution. And this is forever changing. So it's really difficult to speak to the way it is now, because actually we had a different format when I wrote the Investigator grant. But really, they've just sort of put things together and made it a little bit easier for the reviewers. So I think, again, just read the guidelines and what it says. And I can really only talk to the knowledge impact, because this is where I come from. But there are different types of impact, obviously, and you should read the examples of evidence that are highlighted for each one of those. So for instance, in the knowledge impact one, it really highlights very clearly what they want to see from you. As an example, I've done this here. So, really clearly define the impact of your research overall, which is really the first part of this. What is the recognition and the uptake of this research and output, and how many publications you've had, overall, if these have been well cited and who's picking these up. And then demonstrate research beyond your specific field as well. This is one of the things that's highlighted as evidence in the guidelines. So really, if you've developed any new assays or resources like biobanks or data sets that are used beyond your research field, I think that's really important. Or if anyone is looking at a particular pathway that you were working on in a different disease indication, highlighting those sort of things are really important. And then obviously the recognition of the work. So if you've done any presentations, been invited speaker, had some awards, highlight those here as well. And as previously mentioned, evidence is really key. So support all of those points with evidence so that the reviewers actually believe that you're telling them the truth. In the applicant contribution section, again, please look at the guidelines. You'd be surprised how many people have not seen the category descriptors until it's too late. So just make sure that you look at all the information in the category descriptors. It really clearly defines what they need from you. So being proactive and deliberate, targeted, effective, all these words that are used in there. And make sure that you clearly define the impact of your research. And please don't say we, even though you will be part of a bigger team. But here, really highlight what you have done. So you initiated, you led, is what you want to highlight, really. And then reach of the outputs, if there is uptake nationally, internationally, if you've received any grants to support your work. And then beyond the field, what's happening as well, if there's any translational outputs or influence in the field. So if someone has written a commentary on your work, that's really impactful. So you can highlight that. And then obviously recognition of the work otherwise in terms of awards and conferences that you've been invited to as well. So the last bit of the track record is the leadership section, which is 15%. And again, scroll descriptors are my favorite, so I'm going to highlight this again here. Really, in this one, also it gives you a guideline to what the reviewers want to see, which is around research mentoring, and it tells you in parts of the guideline, it actually tells you what the evidence looks like. So, supervising, but also fostering collaborations and successful grants that you've gotten with other collaborators. You can put these here. Then they want to see some research team leadership. And again, that's highlighted here in the score descriptor as well. What is it beyond your research program? Have you done any engagement? Then if you have done work within your institute on committees, chairs, giving evidence of what you've contributed, how you've contributed to this is really important. And of course, if you've been on national and international committees, that's really important as well. And public engagement as well, you can put that in there. Okay. So the last part is the knowledge gain. And really this part is a difficult one because everyone's knowledge gain section obviously looks quite different. But what I want to highlight, as Sahar said as well, the first page is the most important page. And the reason is because as reviewers, so like last year, I would have gotten about 26 applications to review. And so you would read all of them once and then you go back to score them. And it's very difficult to read them fully again. So what you do is usually you try to gauge from reading the first page and remembering back to reading the whole grant, right? So really, this is the point of reference for reviewers when they come back to scoring or ranking everything together. So the first page really counts for a lot. And again, looking at the score descriptors, it sort of defines what they want to see on the first page and what they're going to score you on. So the difference between a 5 or a 7 is going to really be highlighted through the first page. So I've put in some notes here, you use I, don't use we. Tell them why, tell them about your vision, why, and why only you could do this particular sort of work. whether this issue is critical. It doesn't have to be affecting billions of people. It has to be just an important, critical issue. And they say this in the guidelines as well. So really important to go to the guidelines, especially the score descriptors. Highlighting the scientific framework, which they need here, then talking about access to resources and facilities and collaborations, and that really highlights your feasibility. And that's also somewhere in here. This is where it is, and whether risk management has been done. So you would include that in that little section as well, showing the impact of your proposed research. So if you were able to do these themes or aims of your program, what the impact will be, and then of course the outcome as well at the end. And just to highlight, I really like it when the applicant has thought about their whole research program and highlighted that on the first page in a schematic, just because I'm a visual person and that really speaks to me. Just so easy to absorb the information that's given in the whole page with the schematics. So that's really important as well to me. So I was asked to address some key points, and I've put these here. So my take on these is that whether I have a grant checklist, yes, that's my score descriptors. And that's really an easy thing to just keep ticking off. And I usually go back to that and keep referring back to that and seeing if I have answered all of those questions. And that's really the template that I've built into the narrative when I write grants, and just make it easier for reviewers to find. And I really appreciate that as a reviewer as well. So I do that for the reviewers too. Timelines, of course, it's really important to start early. The earlier you start, the better it's going to be. And asking people to read your grant is really important, because you stop seeing all the mistakes. Even like little typos are invisible to you after you've looked at the grant for 6 months. So just give it to someone to read, even if it's little bits like Zahar said. I think that's really important. And the common pitfalls to me, I think it is that people don't spend enough time on the first section, and they only concentrate on the grant proposal, and sort of the track record bit is an afterthought, because that's what we do as scientists. Is the scientific part is a lot more interesting. So my advice would be, don't leave it to the end, and really formatting really matters, especially as a reviewer when it's easy to pick on things. And of course, first impressions matter as well. So spend a lot of time on your first page making it perfect. Thank you for listening. And if you have any more questions as well after the seminar, I'm happy to take emails as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara, for the insightful tips and tricks. I'm now very pleased to welcome Professor Helena Teed. Helena would be giving us more insightful feedback on how to write a winning investigator grant. Thank you, Helena.
Hi, everyone. So thanks for asking me to speak to you all. I'm one of those very fortunate people who got grandfathered, which is sad, because it means I'm a little older than I used to be. But what it does mean is, and it's a bit unfair, but when you try to make political change, you often don't affect those ones who are going to make the political change, because it's going to be too painful. But what I mean by that is, I was on NHMRC Research Committee when the most recent round of changes occurred, whereby you have a limit in the number of investigator grants you can get, or fellowships you can get over your career. And it's not now meant to be a career supporting scheme. And that's important, because I have actually held an NHMRC fellowship since my PhD, or actually since 1 year post, when I had a different fellowship before that, but I've had them back to back through my career. And that's not something that is now possible for others to do. And one of the reasons I'm going to highlight that is that, well, for two reasons. Samira did a beautiful job, and the other speaker, around giving you the detail, and actually you can see, Samira, you've been on the panels before and you've lived that lived experience, and I really think that there were some pearls in there you should all take notice of. Listening to the experience of a peer reviewer who sat on, I think I've done 10 investigator grant panels. All those tips were really important. Think about what the person who is reading your grant has to do, wade through inevitable numbers, try and remember very, very details. So there were some really important tips in there, so much so that I'm not going to repeat them, but I'm going to give you perhaps a higher level insight, which is around the fact that having prepared so many investigator grants over my journey, and you almost get nervous each time because you think, right, I've had them before and I'm not going to be that fortunate this next time. And it's almost harder when you're reapplying than when you first get it. But one of the things I'm going to talk about is just picking up on a couple of things Samira said, and then actually talking slightly differently about planning for investigator grants longer term. Because I don't think your investigator grant is ever about when you write it. It's actually about the 2 or 3 years before you write it. And that's really important for people to think about. With a very low success rate, there's a couple of things that you really need to think about. First of all, is this scheme right for you? And when I say that, people have the biggest impact, and what they're trying to do is fund leaders. It's harder when you're applying for EL1 and EL2 to tell who is a leader and who's hanging off the coattails of their supervisor. And that's one of the reasons why EL1s are rarely now awarded immediately out of a PhD. They want you to have earned your stripes, and there's many reasons why that's a bit unfair, but they want to see that you've done that these days. But what they are looking for is people who will lead research for a body of impact that is going to bring a whole lot of researchers on a journey. This is not just about you, and that's really clear because they're trusting you with a fairly big quantum of money, and they're doing that because they are saying this person has made a real difference wherever they are in the continuum. They are leading their team, they're leading engagement with stakeholders, they're delivering impact wherever you are on the career journey. If you're not that leader who's delivering that impact, this scheme is not for you. And you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time preparing these applications that can be incredibly soul-destroying for quite a small reward. So in my team, I have 6 people who are on fellowships, and there's another 6 who are going in. There are 2 things I do before we decide who goes in each year. The first thing is we really sit down and say, tell me your story in 3 minutes. Tell me why NHMRC should fund you. And really tell me why you're going to do exactly what the scheme is intended. So look at the aim of the scheme and tell me why you're going to do that and why you. And that has to be not because you want money to do research. Anyone who's applying for this scheme who wants money to do their research, just don't. Because one, it's not enough to do that. I mean, it is when you get to the senior levels, but also it's not the scheme for you. And so, it's really about how this is going to give you a massive step change in your career that is going to deliver impact for the people who funded you. And if you think about it that way, it's positioning yourself as the driver to be able to deliver the impact and align to the metrics that they're needing. So don't think about this as a grant funding scheme. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you decide that you want to do this, how are you going to know whether or not you're competitive and it's worth your time and effort? Because it takes time and effort. Samira gave you some really good insight, but to do the work that she's talking about takes time and it takes effort, and it is a waste of your time and effort if you're not going to be competitive. So it's really important to know. So are you, in that career trajectory, are you able to make a difference? And that's based on relative to opportunity and taking into account career disruptions. But are you in a position on your journey where you are going to make a difference and you can tell a leadership story and an impact story for all the reasons that you've heard about before, and being able to demonstrate that? And not everyone's research can do that. Partly it's an individual thing, but actually partly sometimes it's just luck. Your experiments didn't quite turn out the way you wanted. They haven't quite gotten to a big impact journal. They haven't quite been able to transition to the next stage. So there is some of that, but you could be clever enough to recognise that and go, okay, this year is not the year that I go in. And you're not looking for successive fellowships because they're not available. You're looking for times to step change in your career. So if you understand what the scheme is for and pick the right scheme, Because if you spent this much time writing an MRFF grant or a different stream grant, you'd probably be far more successful. So pick your stream is the first thing. Make sure you align to the scheme aspirations and it's the right scheme. And then not just because you want funding for your salary or funding for your research. And then the other thing is, if you've applied before, look at the scores. Look carefully at the scores. Because with the people I had who applied last time, and I actually do mentor my team as to whether or not they should apply. And one of the reasons for that is they'll be looking at the metrics and they'll go, oh, I got 5.1 and the cutoff was 5.8. I'm close. But actually, when you look at the table on the scores underneath it, it shows you that there was the top, 6 or 10% who got funded, and they were all in category 6. So if you're at the bottom of category 5, you're about 75 or 75th centile or even 50th centile. You've got to get up to 6th centile to get to get funded. So look at the scores on the table and work out how far off you were off the mark. Because even sometimes when you're 5.7 and the cutoff was 5.8, you may still be 20% away. So it's really important to understand the maths on that table and work out how close or otherwise you were. And if people are a long way off, I often ask them not to submit the next time and to put that time and effort into developing their careers for potentially subsequent applications. That's different if your whole career is dependent on that funding, but even so, I would say put your effort into a different funding stream application or partnering with others to use your time better. Don't just go on the treadmill of thinking, I need a fellowship, because the scheme is not the same as it used to be. It's not about your salary. It's about funding leaders that are going to have impact. The next thing is your top 10. As a reviewer, the first thing we look at, 35%, you look at your top 10. Now, unconventionally, and I say unconventionally because I've watched this change over the years, is that your top 10 is not necessarily First Author New England or Lancet or JAMA or the papers that the journals that you think matter. Actually, your top 10 is telling that beautiful impact story for each paper. And if you can tell a narrative across the whole set of papers and try not to jam pack it with too much data so it's unreadable. If you do all these little dot points and make it undigestible, then as Samira said, when you're actually trying to read it, it doesn't make sense. So you need to, in a very short number of characters, say this paper that might just be published in a journal, my top paper, for example. And I've just fortunately had my fellowship renewed to start in 2027. And I will share with the 59 of you in Chatham House rules. I was very nervous about putting my application in this time because even at my career stage, which is an L3, I didn't have a First Author New England. I had some senior in some other journals, but I definitely didn't have the sort of track record that you often see, or I often see in people applying for this scheme. But every one of my papers had a really good impact story. Like they had changed policy in 29 countries. They'd changed drug approval pathways. They'd changed, there were some big metrics that I had bothered to do research on to show that the guidelines that I published or led, I did a very small survey-based study, I say very small, 8,000 people, but it didn't take me very long to do it, to actually show how the guidelines had impacted on knowledge for clinicians and care and experience for patients. That publication was critically important to include because it was affirming the difference that my first publication made. So all of my work was quite genuinely telling a story about impact, and it was not the impact factor of the journal. And because everything I wrote about was impact, wherever it was along the journey, from a mechanistic study that led to a new program of research, through to cohort studies, through to patient experience studies, actually, all of them were telling a narrative about how I was pushing research into practice anywhere along that pathway. And to my surprise, because I almost felt sick when I opened the email about whether or not I got this, was exactly as Samira's just shared with you. The reviewers get their highlighter out and they go, metric, can I see this in here? Metric can, and in fact, their comments are increasingly exactly aligned to the words that are in there, like down to the T. And so I can just reinforce, if you decide, and with your mentors and people are advising you, that this is the right scheme for you to go in, and this is the right year for you to go in, and you're making a difference and you're leading change and you can tell that narrative, you tell it in those first 10 papers, The rest, because that's 35%, the rest is important, it's critical, but you don't have your foot in the door unless you can tell that story with your top 10. So with my team, I just say, right, we're going to do the top 10 and we'll make a decision one way or the other about whether or not you're going in. And then we'll talk about the other things. But I think the critical point is to go back, even when you're describing each paper, to the metrics. Get your highlighter out on the peer review document. It's the most important document you will read. And use your green and your yellow and your blue highlighter and then go, okay, have I answered that? Have I actually addressed that? And I suppose that was the trick that I really focused on to really be able to tell that story. And it was my highest scored application I've had in my career. So I got a category 7, which is, very difficult to get. But the reason I got a category 7 is those descriptors were verbatim. In other words, I said, how do I prove that it is this? How do I make it easier for whoever's reviewing this to say this is irrefutable? This person has met these metrics and done it in this way and given evidence that they've led it. So really read the peer, make sure that it's the right scheme, make sure it's the right career stage. Don't waste your time if it's not. Start with your 10 pubs and tell the impact story. Each impact descriptor for each paper align to those metrics. So you're always telling a leadership impact story. Samira said to you, don't say team, don't say we. Unfortunately, that's true. You can say, I led my team and we did this. I led this initiative. If you did, don't claim you did if you didn't. But most of you, I find, actually did lead it. But you say, we, us, we all got together and did this. My ECRs are amazing. That's not the place to do that. And if you want to make sure you're not doing it, because I can tell you almost every one of these applications, even if they're de-identified, I can tell if they're written by a male or a female because of the way they unashamedly do self-promotion differently. So you need male colleagues to read your application and make sure they are framing it in a way that you might not be comfortable framing it. That's my other tip. So then the other thing I just wanted to come back to is, if you want to be on this scheme and you want it to fund you over your career, because it's an incredible privilege to have not only your salary paid, so you've got autonomy, and to have money to play with, which for me supports my ECRs and my MCRs. If you want to be in that position, then you need to think about your career tailored to that type of program. So you need to think about 2 years out or 3 years out. In fact, the moment you get your fellowship. So I'm 3.5 years in and I had to apply for my next fellowship. So you haven't had very long and you're actually applying for the next one. So all that time, I have the peer review metrics on my wall, and so does everyone in my team who's aiming to go for this scheme in a competitive way. They are saying, how am I demonstrating my track record? I'm going to go for higher impact. I'm not talking about impact factor, higher impact papers. And I'm going to then go out of my way to demonstrate how they had impact. I'm going to do all my research about how I tell that impact story. And if I don't have that evidence, I'm going to do research to generate the evidence about the impact of what I did. I'm thinking about how am I demonstrating my leadership in research, my leadership in that role, because that's what they want to fund. And then with my knowledge gain, how I build on the story and make them really, really comfortable that I'm the person to lead this, that based on my leadership, this is the right, so it's a narrative all the way through. It's not 3 disjointed bits. Here's my top papers. And I chose them because they're in a high impact journal, but I can't really tell a narrative or an impact story. Here's my track record, which is based around not, again, necessarily a narrative. And then, here's my knowledge gain, which doesn't necessarily build on the fact that it's there. So the top ranked applicants tell a beautiful narrative that aligns to all of those things that you've got your highlighter on in the peer review document. So read the instructions, because so many people don't. Read the peer review metrics and highlight them and align it, but plan 2 to 3 years before you're actually going, worst case a year before you're going in, so that you're actually thinking about all the time, which we should all be thinking about, because the Australian public fund us and they are the beneficiaries and recipients of what we do. And the privilege of being funded is that we have to make sure we are doing research that is actually going to deliver impact wherever you are along that continuum. And if you think like that, and you think about leadership in a way of how do I deliver the biggest impact wherever you are in that career trajectory, they're the people who are going to get funded in this scheme. And if you shape your career like that, brilliant. If you don't, or you've had those bad luck experiences, and a lot of them are luck, so your research has gone sideways or it's negative, and especially in benchtop, that's quite hard to publish, excuse me, then step aside from this program for a year or maybe two, think about other streams and put your time and effort into those, because they're likely to be much better aligned to where you are. And the only other thing I'd say, because it might be a bit depressing, is if you read the National Medical Research Strategy, the NHMRC strategy, there is a strong focus on clinician researchers in there, which hopefully means that the traditional NHMRC fellowships will go to people more doing the discovery transition. But definitely for clinicians or anyone in health professionals, there will be more funding that will be coming through. And so I think at least there's more money in the system, and there will be more focus on fellowships than there has been in the past. And hopefully with these new fellowships, make room for more traditional fellowships. But yeah, I think they would be my main things I would add to the excellent outline that you've had. And always think about people reviewing. I've chaired panels, I've read more of these than I would care to remember. And that visual on the front page of your knowledge gain, really impactful visual. I can just look at that and go, yes, I know what you're doing. And I don't need to go and read the whole thing, and it makes coherent sense and you can explain it. I can remember it. Try not to make your information too dense. I have to read 20 or 30 of these. So really important. So I'm going to wrap up now and leave you for Q&A. And hopefully they were icing on the cake for the other tips that you've already had, which were excellent. So.
Thank you so much, Helena. That was excellent. That was really excellent. It just tells me in terms of when and what not to apply for, and I think putting your time in the right effort is very important for all of us. So yeah, I would start with the question and answer session at this stage. There's only one question in the Q&A from someone. It says, I thought we were not meant to include journal matrix.
So you cover direct metrics. So in other words, impact factor, no, but you can tell where the journal's ranked. So it's the top, exactly as you got from Samira, it's the second journal in infectious diseases or the top journal in infectious diseases. But it's what I'm getting at is in the past, people were looking for BMJ and New England Journal and JAMA, whether you give them the metrics or not, that's what they were thinking as you get up to the top levels of fellowships. But then that has moved away from that now to those descriptors, to did your research have impact? And I mean real, tangible impact. Do you want to add to that, Samira?
No, the same. And you can remember there's other metrics that you can add about your paper as well, along with cites and the field weighted citations that Sahar mentioned before. So I think just if it's part of the narrative, of course, you can also say Q1, Q2. So that already gives the reviewer an idea where the standing of the journal is, even though we're not allowed to say impact factors. So there's lots of tips in the category descriptors, I guess, and the guidelines actually tell you that what you can and cannot do. So H index is not allowed, I think still, but you can still talk about what your impact in the field is and what your standing in is internationally, nationally, how many people internationally have cited your work, and things, metrics like that really can highlight the H index as well.
And so how did you?
Yes, so same again, so highlighting why this journal was the right journal for you to publish is kind of like the metrics that you do.
And also if you've got, if it's your PhD student who's the first author, and you might have even put your postdoc as a senior author and you might be co-senior, but you've done that to progress the career, you can tell that narrative. You can actually say, it's my PhD student who is first author. My postdoc is deliberately last and joint author. I was the senior author on this paper. This was my role. So you can still, and that's increasingly what I do, is to be able to tell that story of both building your team and your early and mid-career researchers. And you could do the same with your PhD students if they're a first author. So it's not a problem that you're not first, because it was still your intellectual property, your leadership, and they're first. So your role in that paper is really important.
Great, thank you so much. There's just another question at the chat function. So for Sumaira, did you go for EL1? It seems like you would be EL2. Someone was asking. Yeah.
Yeah, because of my career disruptions, I was actually EL2 when I got my L1, but that was because years post PhD, but I was already level D. So my institute advised me not to go for EL2. So I did go for L1 in the end, which is what I got. But I was in a career development fellowship, which was the old ELs, I guess, in the NHMRC system before they changed the wording. So straight off the CDF, I had a year not funded by NHMRC, and then back to the fellowship L1. Yeah.
Mira, just to clarify, you went for an L1, not an EL1.
No, I went for a
so the comment in the chat was they thought you went for an EL1, they thought you were an EL2, but you actually went for the one above that, which is an L1.
Yes, I went for an L1. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
That's a great call, I think. And for Suzanne in the chat, for everyone, I was a 0.4 miss in 2024 and a 0.8 in 2025. Should I take a break or go again? So much work and shock, I scored lower.
Oh, one thing I would say is there's the group that you've got, if you're competitive, and probably 25 to 30% of people who apply are competitive, within that envelope, there is a fair bit of tossing a coin. So to me, you apply if you're competitive. And if it's not so much the 0.4 or the 0.8, it's that percentile chart. So when you get your outcome letter and there's a results table in there, you can work out with some pretty simple mathematics. Claude can do it for you in 2 seconds, where you're going to be ranked pretty much nationally if you have the score descriptors in there and your score and knowing where the cutoff was and the percentage. It'll work it out for you in 2 seconds, but it'll tell you what percentile you're on. And I would suggest it's that, not the score so much. But having said that, if you think you're in that 25 to 30% top band and you've got good mentors, go for it. If you're sitting below that, don't waste your time doing it, just unless you've had a big increment, unless you've gone, okay, I've done something amazing in the last year. I've strategically done something that would change my narrative. But within that 30%, don't be too demoralised, because the reality is within it, 1 year you'll get a reviewer and you'll get lower, and the next year, even if you put the same thing in, you'll get a bit higher. So you're aiming for that top 25, 30%, really. Do you think that's about fair, guys? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, and another comments, I guess, for someone with a now traditional career path and 10 years post-PhD, how strict are the levels for post-PhD years? I have a strong relative to opportunity, but not career disruption.
I think the research office can advise you a little bit better, because they'll have all the information around that, and that's what they did for me as well. So I would definitely approach them with all the information that you have around your career disruption and relative to opportunity as well, and then see what they have to say, which level you should go on. Sahar, do you have?
I'm not sure about how strict the 10 years post-PhD is for EL1 and EL2. But yeah, as Samira mentioned, I think it's better to get advice from your institute.
They are pretty strict, and if they think that you've gone outside that, when they add them up, you can be ineligible. So you can put all that effort in. But very few top universities would allow people to put in an application that wasn't eligible. I'll tell you where you should go. Actually, on Samira's point before too, it's not really so much. People think it's desperately dependent on the level you go in. I'll get an EL1, I won't get an EL2. It's not quite like that. And it's not that for peer reviewers. You know, your review, it's basically at it for you right now. This person in their years post PhD, whatever they are they making enough difference? Do they show they're on a leadership trajectory? Especially when you get into the leadership levels, the level you apply it makes less difference than you think.
Yeah, it's only when what you think is like an L3 going for a L1, that's when you start questioning things. But I think the other way around doesn't, yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, I agree. If you
yeah,
under apply,
yeah,
people get
yeah,
really annoyed with you.
yeah,
If you over apply, it's really a disadvantage.
yeah,
Good
yeah.
point.
Good point. Yeah. Thank you. There isn't any more questions from the participant, but I've got two questions. Just wanting some clarification and insights. So, what types of impact evidence tend to be more persuasive to reviewers, like beyond citations, obviously?
Depends who your reviewer is, and that's hard.
Yeah.
But that's why you need to highlight the peer review, because they do drill it into us now that we need to absolutely align to the to the metrics. And because every third word in my application was impact, like literally, then you, and even the mechanistic basic research I'd done, it was all about the impact that and had. So, and that's because in an L3, what they're looking for is impact, impact, impact. So you deliver something that's targeted to that. So all I'd say is adhere to those metrics the best you can, and understand there's a bit of there is an individual aspect to the reviewer's comments.
And remember, like the knowledge impact versus the health impact versus the social impact, they're all different. So all the keywords are different in the guidelines as well. So use what's appropriate to you.
Do you have tips in terms of how do you go about collecting evidence, or your matrices?
For your metrics, I would say that when you go through like websites that can give you metrics, you mainly find what you need. This was really new to me as well when I applied for my year one. So I went through different websites, and then I realized what metrics is about, basically. So yeah, so I would say just check different websites for metrics and pick the one that are really relevant to your field and use those.
I agree. And make sure you pick your peer reviewers categories really, really carefully. I spend a lot of time with my team and within my university actually really thinking about the reviewers and who they're likely to come from and what field. And even the impact story you tell needs to be aligned to your peer review categories. If you've chosen midwifery and obstetrics, or you need to tell a story that's linked to outcomes in that space. And that's sort of the other side of the trick, is what people don't think about.
And your library usually, so our library at UQ can actually give you a lot of the metrics as well. So they can do a breakdown of what your impact has been. Has your work been cited by patents and other things that we don't really think about? We only think of publication sites. So things like that have a huge impact as well. So that your library should be able to give you like a breakdown of those too.
Yeah, their policy impacts are really important too. Has it been, cited in guidelines? Has it been cited in drug approval documents? And your libraries are helpful, but in fact, I have to say sometimes AI, as long as you double and triple check the accuracy, AI can find things that you might not. Please don't reference it if you haven't checked it, but you'll often find they'll find things that are unconventional.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all the very insightful comments. And thank you, everyone. I don't think we have any more questions by the participant. I'd like to thank you, everyone, for your questions and engagement, and for the speakers, especially for your generously sharing your time, expertise, and really practical, great advice today. We hope you all find these sessions valuable and take away useful insight to support your own grant application. Just to let you know, this session is recorded, and recording will be available through the Wharton YouTube channel, and usually by the end of the following week. Could I also please urge the audience to complete the evaluation survey, which will open automatically when you exit this webinar, sorry, and it will only take about 2 minutes to complete, but it's very useful for us to improve, future planning. So on behalf of all the organizing team, I want to thank you for your attending this session, and we look forward to you future events together as well. Thank
Good
you so
luck.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.